For the glass of soda water, join us in the front gallery. Out below.
After the talk.
Hi, welcome. We're just starting our talk. Come on in. So my name is Erin Morrison. I'm the gallery and shop manager here at the Art Base. And I'm seeing some familiar faces and some new faces. Did some of you come from the Front Range? Anybody? So we got some new faces that I haven't seen before, which is wonderful. I'm going to open by just introducing the Art Base. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we were founded in 1996. The Art Base fosters creative expression for all ages and abilities in the visual arts, providing exhibitions to regional artists and arts programming to the Roaring Forks Valley. What I wanted to do tonight was introduce you to Ann Morgan and Dorothy Raymond, two incredible artists. Ann is from the Denver area. She's represented by RA Modern in Crested Butte. So as the crows flies, what, like a couple hours?
Yeah.
Less than that?
How long did it take?
It's like 35 miles as the crow flies.
I
Like
think-
4 hours as the
Like 4
Okay,
hours.
if y'all had wings, would be there in no time. All right. So Ann Morgan's exhibition, Once When I Was You, is kind of the final iteration. It's part 3 of a series that began when?
Last year, early 2023, before I turned 50.
Okay. So I wanted to just give you a little bit of information that we put together on our press release and price list, which you guys are all welcome to take with you. We've got plenty printed out. So Once When I Was You, it's an exhibition of oil on canvas works, pretty large scale. We have one smaller scale work, and incorporates technology and traditional forms of landscape painting together. Drawing from her background in tech, Morgan utilizes AI tools to create digital mashups that combine personal memories and social media imagery, which are then transformed into large-scale physical pieces. Her works capture an idealized virtual reality now lived through screens. So one thing that she's really working with is a borrowed language from social media, but also images that have kind of come to her that you kind of found after your 50th birthday, right? You had this kind of realization that you were revisiting certain points in your life that you wanted to reflect through this work. So I want to give a little quote. This series is especially meaningful as I've worked on it leading up to and after my 50th birthday. It seems I need to evaluate and examine everything leading up to this moment at once to move forward to the next phase of my life. Once when I was a college student or a child, working to get ahead in my career in tech, approaching middle age, or in any number of versions of myself that are in my past and in the space that others occupy now. So I just want to welcome Ann, and thank you so much for coming and putting on this incredible show. I had a question. It's really about how one generates images. Now, we have these screens, these devices that are always available to us. You can always have them charged. I have 2 children. I've got a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old, and they're absolutely fascinated by screens. And I do think it's an interesting way to kind of start our conversation because it does act as kind of a filter for your process. It's like you have these images that you're building and layering, and then they form the composition to your work. So I'm wondering if you can kind of describe that process, how you get them so large, how you decide your colors, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I worked in tech for a long time, and I think digitally, like I think on the computer. That's just what I do now. So when I started painting again, it made sense to me to start sketching on the computer with my tablet, just like I would do for graphic design, or it's just how I work. So I build digital sketches. I trained an AI model with my own images. So I had a bunch of stuff called art stuff that I collected since 2008, and I put a lot of it in a model. So it's a collection of images, and then the AI will train on that small collection. So sometimes when I do a text prompt, I'll recognize pieces of what I get back, and then I layer those in Photoshop and then I put other things with it, like things that I've stole, and things people send me and things I've collected. And I just build that image and I save it. I project it using a projector like I used to have in conference rooms. And that's how I get it so big to work on the screen. Often I paint the dark because of the projector, so I have my paint set up and I do my sketches that way. So sometimes things are a surprise when I turn on the lights. Sometimes not a good surprise. Sometimes I do that over and over again. So when I want to restart a painting, I'll do another digital sketch. I'll project that on a dry layer. And so some of my paintings are like two paintings at once, like the red one when you walk in. That's actually, that was reprojected several times to end up that way. Where some of my paintings, like this one, I projected a couple times, but that's actually more just painting. So, and actually this one too, so.
You know, I think another thing that is really, I'm just gonna take this because we're already putting this on a device and it's gonna go digitally on the internet. So another thing that kind of came to mind was the tradition of history painting, scale, thinking about really overwhelming the viewer with this experience. And I particularly love this diptych here because it does, you get close to it and you kind of get lost in these swashes of color, but then you back up and there's kind of an orchestration to them, which is really lovely. And you also said something about turning up the lights, starting in the dark. I don't know if you're aware that Rothko painted that way. That's how his colors are just so luminous. He starts in the dark and then he slowly turns the light up. So I think, you know, there's something really beautiful about that connection again of like an image appearing slowly over time, but then you using these kind of layering processes to get there. I'm wondering, you mentioned kind of heroic painting and history painting. Are there any artists that you particularly like are drawn to or that you associate with when you're making this?
Actually not from history. Emma Webster is a contemporary artist who does heroic landscapes and she works from virtual reality. So I really connect with her work. And I actually think it's kind of an inside joke to make huge oil paintings that are traditional based on something digital that I made. It's just kind of a funny way to work because I don't even use materials that are from this century or last century.
Do you feel like these would be as, well, I feel like I already know the answer to this, but do you feel like there's a way to make these digital? And I mean, I think one thing that we like to do as consumers is come up with the easiest way to produce something on a large scale. And I think what I like about this work is that there's texture, there's surface, there's transition, and they really have to be seen in person. I really struggle with that with my own work, and a lot of artists do. Work not being translated well through photography, through that medium. How do you feel about these pieces being, for example, put on a press release? And do you think that at some point there's a way to bring the digital like back into the process as a final product, or are you a hardcore oil painter now?
I'm a hardcore oil painter.
Yeah.
I think the process of making the huge pieces is, it's part of the experience for me. So it's not just, I spent so many years chained to a desk and just sitting, as we all do, in front of a computer. So, it's also kind of an inside joke to take this digital thing, made that when I was sitting at a computer and blow it up into something that's so physical. And these are pretty hard to make, especially, I'm not a very big person. And just, it involves ladders and all sorts of physical work. So it's, I don't know, that whole thing is part of the process. And I think it's okay that they don't read like they're supposed to on a press release, like Word just usually doesn't.
I think they're really strong, even though the space is not huge, they just occupy it so well. And there are moments too where you're using kind of a iridescent paint. which is something I don't see a lot of. Is that a sun form, or is that, what is that for?
This one, so this summer I spent a lot of time at my parents' house, and I'm an only child, so my room is exactly how I left it when I was 18 and left for college. So I was in, yeah, it's a time capsule. So I spent time in my tiny little bed, looking out of the window like I did when I was a kid, 7 years old, and I just, it's that memory of looking at the moon outside my window, and it's like this draws from like all those kind of cliche little girl things that you like shiny gold jewelry, neon pink, Tiffany blue. So it just draws from those kinds of things that I was obsessed with when last time I spent a lot of time in that little room.
Tell us about the turquoise.
The turquoise it's Tiffany blue. I grabbed the box from Tiffany's and tried to match it, so there's some matches. And so just to bring in that, you're probably not going to recognize it when you see it, but just to bring in that kind of feeling of jewelry, things that you obsess on a little bit, or at least I did. Princess Diana was a big one, and that was spending time in my room with my books, my Princess Diana book I had. It was something that I kept thinking about.
Are some of the color choices inspired by like digital editing or like a digital photo?
Yeah, I work in Photoshop, so my colors are digital, the RGB, what you get, and which is not often easy to replicate with oil paints. Oil paints tend to want to be natural colors. So this neon pink is not something I made. I have made neon pink before with soap pigment that's oil soluble. So, and there's a way, sometimes you can layer paints just so they pop, oil paints pop a little more than you would normally expect. Usually people use acrylic paint to get that kind of fake digital color. But I really love the way oil paints look and how you can do the transparent layers and build things up just a lot differently than I can make. I can't make acrylics look like that. Some people can, but it's not mine.
I have a question about what you mean by new realism.
It's a term that I've seen used for people who use digital or virtual worlds as their basis. So our realism now, you think of realism as going out to see the landscape or looking at people who are doing a scene, and it's it still is, but also realism is sitting in front of your computer and playing video games or doing a Zoom meeting or whatever. That is real just as much as anything else.
Right. Well, in modern art history, there is a movement called New Realism from the 60s. So you're talking about new realism.
Yeah, that's funny. I think new realism. Super new realism. Yeah, I saw
I
that
have
in a
another
magazine.
observation, in modernism, you look at the stretcher width and think about that, and you've painted the stretchers, which Rothko and others never did. So you're actually making an object that folks think of as sculptural rather than flat screen digital.
It's a choice that I made. Well, it's a choice that I made for two reasons. One reason is not based on anything. It's based on another artist that was in the studio space I was in. He was like, "Hey, do you want to paint the edges?" And I was like, "I don't know." And so I just considered it for a while. I'm like, well, maybe I should paint the edges. And then I decided to continue the painting over to the edges, and I'm like, this is just a completely different effect than I expected, because the paintings look different from side to side,
Yeah.
and they really function as an object.
Right, you move around on this diptych. But it's a way of kind of authenticating artists at different stages, is the width of their stretcher bars, the availability of that at different times. So it's pretty conscious choice by artists like Warhol and everybody, you know, how they've framed a canvas at a certain point. So, you know, I particularly find it really lovely because when you move around, you know, you're looking at it in a different way, from different.
Thank you, yeah, it's purposeful now. I started doing it.
Good question.
Yes.
Maybe we have one more question?
Yeah, a lot of the dialogue you mentioned really like strikes me, like, when people try to impress like how good the resolution of like a TV is, they typically use like natural imagery, they'll show you like peacocks and like waves, but then they adjust it to have like a higher saturation than is really natural. And a lot of the color palettes here, like I feel like reflect that saturation that shows up in those instances. And then along with that line, like this piece, those like screens have the ability to like have depth, but they can't really escape being flat. And like there's some moments where like the depth is like visually there, like the trumpery or like the vision of it, but then it returns to being flat. Like whereas just the moon in the middle, what I'm interpreting is a moon or like some distant like body. And then, but those waves are framing it as if it's like right in front of you.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I do most of my sketch work in Photoshop. So this is all coming from Photoshop, and I use the saturation filter to work with the color. And I'm putting together several different images into one image as I build. So I'm cutting things out, and like you do in Photoshop, I'm putting things on different layers. So it definitely translates into the paintings where, you know, some things are out of perspective, or to go flat, or have deeper, you know, feelings. Like that's just how it looks in Photoshop, and it definitely how it ends up on the painting, even though it's painted. So yeah.
Yeah, I can really feel the process and inspiration, like all the thought into it.
Thank you.
As we look at your artwork and assume that it's water from St. Clair River, or maybe the Lake Michigan, where you're from, Michigan, or we had superimposed mountains, snowy mountains, what do you take of our observations and what you've painted?
I like to hear what people bring to paintings, because everyone, like my paintings are about memory. Like no matter how I get there, they are about memory. So everyone comes to my paintings with some different memory that it inspires in them. Or people tell stories and different things that it makes them think about it. That's part of the process too. That's my favorite part of having finished paintings, is that kind of connection.
Did you include that coral pink for any reason versus the hot pink you used in this? How did you choose some of those colors?
The neon pink that I use in this one is really, it's purposeful because it was relating to myself as a 7-year-old girl. And this one, I was more focused on the scene, I guess, of the water and some of the more natural colors that I don't often use. Like this painting stands out because I used quite a few things that I don't normally, like I have gray. I've never, not never, but I hadn't used gray in a painting in a very long time. I just wanted more of a natural feeling, at least in parts, in this particular painting, just to definitely reference that water from the Great Lakes, and just definitely put you in a place rather than let you come up with a place, I guess.
What would happen if you lowered the lights and darkened this? How would the colors reflect? Or, I don't know the words. How would the colors look? Is it possible to do that?
Yeah, sure. Well, do we do it real quick? Sure.
Did you have like this
No.
gallery?
I dropped off the paintings and ran.
So this is a curatorial choice.
And now I see the hotter pinks over there at the top.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow,
It's
look at that.
illuminated.
So, I mean, if you're interested in paint and pigment, it's a particular type of paint or color from Gamblin. It's not iridescent, it's called radiant. So I think maybe the way that that pigment is picking up the light is related to that. And, you know, the darker or the less vibrant areas are mixed paint, and that is just straight out of the tube, which is something that, you know, I only use for an effect. We typically don't do that on a painting, but it really works for those particular colors.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to move on to Dorothy's exhibition now. Dorothy